So welcome everyone. Again, this is cohort 50, the filtration interventions. So we're going to identify three things essential to getting those actual particle reductions when you have a portable air cleaner. We're going to identify a couple of applications for fan filters, and we already heard tube, stick it up on your kitchen counter or by your cat litter box. And we're going to identify two reasons why you need to consult someone like Rhett if you're going to change your furnace to being a continuous high filtration device, which is the one that seems easiest in the long run after you get over the expense and duct relocation. Okay.
So, to Don.
Okay, this is William Fisk from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and he's saying that better filtration is the highest potential remediation that you can do to get good indoor air quality in your house. And the health benefits are predicted to far exceed the cost of the intervention. So like Ryan was talking about, it wasn't that expensive, and they expect to recoup that investment by better health, which I don't know. I guess in Canada we have free healthcare, so you might not, but in the US you got to pay for your healthcare. So there you go. So let's talk about filtration resources. The EPA guidelines, air cleaners and air filters in the home. If you go to this link, there's two documents here. One is a full 70-page document, and one is a 7-page summary. Both of them are excellent and worth going to see. And ROCIS website, of course, we have a couple of things here. We have a report on the Claritin air filter project where we saw some very good results by introducing portable air cleaners, and we have a description of the air handler work that Rhett does and the results from that. So both these resources are good ways to get encouraged about cleaning up the air in your house through filtration. So these are the conclusions to date. As we said, you can reduce particle counts inside your house with filtration, and that's pretty clear in almost every case. The beauty of having a Dilos or some air quality monitor like a Dilos is that it reinforces the filtration. If you find that whenever you have the filter on, your Dilos is low, and if you turn it off, your Dilos suddenly pops up. It's because you can't sense particle counts without a monitor. It's a real asset to have the monitor along with the filtration and the source control. So the tighter the house, the greater the impact filtration. So if you had, say, the standard Austin in a small house and the standard Austin in a house of 3,500 square feet, it would have more of an effect in a smaller house, all other things being equal. And also if you had a tight envelope. But of course, if you have a small house or a tight house, it is more critical to control indoor sources because they have more of an effect. Like a cooking incident has more of an effect in a small tight house than it does in a big leaky house. And one way of dealing with this, I guess, as Emily was talking about it in her house, you can choose the times that these are in use and choose the places. So if the majority of the time that you're spending in your house is the 8 hours a night, if you're lucky, sleeping, then having a portable air cleaner in the bedroom for that 8 hours is going to make more of an effect than having a whole house being done when you're away. You can target and get a big effect from a fairly small intervention. So there are 4 strategies to reduce indoor air particles, and you covered some of these on the behavioral webinar. So you reduce air exchange from the outside, you reduce indoor sources, you reduce resuspension, and the one we're going to be talking about today is filtration through portable air cleaners, do-it-yourself fan filters, or a central air handler retrofit with a high MERV filter and an efficient fan motor. And you've seen this graph before, and it's all the different houses. So it's the Dilos total particles on a log scale. And what they've done is they've ordered them from the highest particle count houses on the left all the way down to the lowest particle count houses on the right. And you can see the ones on the right are in the Dilos good and very good range, and even down into the Dilos excellent range. So in the green, as I call it. And if you look at this small group of ones on the far right, almost every one of them has either a portable air cleaner in operation or a central air handler retrofit. There may be one or two where they live in places with much better air than Pittsburgh, but almost all of them deal with filtration to get down in that very good or excellent air quality. Finally, as again, as Emily mentioned, filtration only works when it's on. So you need to find a system or a strategy. So we say, okay, do I go for the central air handler or do I go for a portable unit? You need to find something that works for you. If it's too noisy or it's too drafty or something of that sort, and you turn it off, then you've got the solution, but it's not going to have an effect. So find something that works for you that you can tolerate and then run it.
Thanks, Dawn. So we're going to chat a little bit about portable air cleaners. Portable air cleaners are sometimes called by us PACs and sometimes in other settings referred to as air purifiers. And here are two different types. They are generally designed to treat one room or one zone if you have a more open plan house, not a whole house. And they primarily reduce particles, and that's really the only way that we can measure them, as we'll see in the next slide. So performance by filter type, you absolutely, for particle reduction, want HEPA, not HEPA-like. The names are similar, but they're very different, and HEPA-like is not effective, so you want a HEPA filter. For other things like the reduction of gases, vapors, fumes, carbon works, but it's hard to tell how much you need to work well and how long things like the carbon cloth found in cheaper air cleaners works for before it just gets sort of gummed up or overcome by what is in the air. Note that there isn't a standard for any of those other things to certify performance, so it's kind of buyer beware and make the best decision that you can with what you know. Some things should just be avoided. These include plasma wave, ionization, and PCO. And one of the things we noticed when we trialed them was that some air cleaners come on with these functions and you have to choose to turn them off. So we opted for air cleaners where this was not something that came on by itself. Personally, I found the plasma wave very uncomfortable. And anything that promises to kill viruses, you absolutely do not want in your house. So performance in terms of, sorry?
Can you explain that?
So we want to filter out a virus, that's fine, and sort of trap it so it's not in circulation, but we don't want anything that's going to be killing them in our air. Does that make sense?
For what reason, though?
If they kill, they're typically the other strategies that are called additives.
I just wanted to know your perspective on that. Thanks.
So
Yes.
the PCO is photocatalytic oxidation, and it'll be discussed in a little bit more detail lately, but it's associated with things that are very toxic to human health.
There can be emissions from the additive air cleaners.
So performance in terms of area served, the number that you'll see on most commercially available air cleaners is the CADR, which is the clean air delivery rate, and it's the industry standard for the capacity, and it's sort of based on square feet usually. And so you want the square feet of the space that you're trying to filter to kind of be in the middle of the range for the air cleaner, not at the sort of extreme edge. It's not going to work as well probably in that setting. So factors affecting the ability to effectively treat the area that you want to clean are the volume of the area, so really high ceilings could affect it. The distribution of filtered air, so do you have a central air handler running at the same time? How leaky is your space? How open is it to other areas? So how many, say, large open doorways does the space have? And how big is the pollutant load? So if there's lots of cooking spikes, or if there is lots of recreational combustion, or a whole lot of cat or dog dander, that all may affect how well it works and how often you need to deal with the filters. As well as the air cleaner itself, so the actual airflow, which is measured in CFM at the various settings. So to note, the CADR rating is only based on the highest settings, and many people don't enjoy having an air cleaner running at the highest setting all the time. So probably most of us are going to run an air cleaner at one of the middle settings. They don't tend to move much air at all at the lowest setting, but in the middle, you're going to want the best rate that you can get. And then some primary occupant concerns, and I guess I would say other occupant concerns. Not sure my children are the primary occupants, but they certainly have influence on this. One is maintenance. So something like the Austin just needs the outside vacuumed when you vacuum the floors, basically. It doesn't need the filter to be changed very often at all, usually a number of years. The smaller, less expensive cleaners tend to need their filters, like the pre-filter on the Coway and Winnex, for example, needs to be vacuumed every couple of weeks, and the filters need to be changed every couple of months. Some of them have sensors where they kind of smell the air and have a auto setting. Sometimes those sensors need to be cleaned every week. So knowing yourself and how good you are at those kinds of maintenance is a good self-examination before you make one of these purchases. The cost of filter replacement. So when we looked at the smaller ones versus the bigger ones, like the Austin, it kind of came out fairly equal. It was just whether or not you wanted to do a smaller replacement every year because they sell you a packet of filters, or whether you want to not have to do it for several years and then it's a more expensive filter. Another concern is energy use, energy cost. They're going to use more energy and cost more at a higher setting and less at a lower setting, but there's kind of a sweet spot, hopefully, where it doesn't have to be running super high, but maybe you're leaving it on all the time because most of us know that when we turn it off, it's going to be harder to turn back on. So getting the maximum benefit for the lowest price. Noise. The older Austins were definitely noisier than the newer ones. And at the highest settings, most of them tend to be kind of noisy. So we've had, spouses who couldn't hear the television or children who just don't like the noise. So all of these kind of work together. And air movement and comfort. So comfort in summer, say when I was pregnant in the hottest summer in 40 years or something, I loved the air cleaner blowing on me. It feels very different in winter when it's cold. And different air cleaners have different ways that they try and move the air. So the Austin very deliberately moves the air in a circle in a room, which means that it's kind of hard to get away from the air movement. It does kind of create a draft. So in a house with a lower set point, that may be an issue. For kids that want to see the balloon move all over the room, totally fun. Other air cleaners have different air movement. So we noticed the Coway kind of blows in a diffused way. You can't really notice it unless you're right in front of it. The Winnex blows straight up. So unless you're a little kid in a skirt and you want to kind of play with it, you're not really going to notice the air movement from that one at all. And another concern is, do you just want particle reduction or do you have other issues? If you have, say, a recirculating kitchen fan, you might really be interested in having something that's going to reduce the smell and take out other effects of cooking. So these are all things to consider and to chat about. And they're not really good or bad. They're just personal preference and what you and other people in your house can make work. Does anyone else have any thoughts about this?
I know air cleaners would cost a couple of dollars a month on a medium setting.
Yeah, and I guess this would kind of relate to like whether you do high, medium, low cost. They generally have better efficacy at low or medium than they do high anyway. So just another reason to run it low and quiet.
And then low, you're hardly moving any air at all, so it can be very low energy costs, but you're not getting any benefit. I mean, I was really surprised in looking at the Winnex and the Coway both on a low setting, and it's like a 15 CFM. So you're not filtering air, but you're also not using energy.
But they have like 5 settings, so there's like 3 in the middle, so there's still...
Right.
This is Monica. I think another consideration, and certainly pretty big for my husband and I, is aesthetics. And I find this is true with a lot of my clients as well. So, the Corsi Cube, it works, but it's not beautiful. And I think that's why a lot of people will buy a really pretty air purifier or something that they perceive as being very pretty. And I can talk a little bit about that more when we talk about this later.
I totally agree. I think the black Austins or the black and white Winnex look really sharp of the ones that I've seen. And that definitely was popular in my house.
So this graph is of an Austin in my house, and I basically shut a door between the front and the back of my house and spend, I'm the only one in my house unless Emily is working upstairs in the workspace, but basically the front of the house is what I call the untreated zone, and the back of my house where I live, sleep, work, eat is the treated zone. And so in this graph you see outdoor you see the untreated zone, and you see the treated zone in a very consistent pattern that absolutely tracks outdoors. And if you look at when the outdoors is the worst, so this is a brief period where it was, really bad, 5,000 to 10,000, Dilos small or Dilos total, whatever you want to use, is when the indoors was the highest consistently. Even though my house is tight, Monica, I mean, it's like 800 CFM 50 with a 70-year-old house. So it's a tight house by many standards. Certainly not super tight, but tight. And then conversely, when the outdoor air is the best, and you've all seen some weather where we're at 500 or 600 outdoor, you could easily not run an air cleaner 24/7, or you could cycle it and be, in really good air quality if you kept it going somewhat continuously, but off and on. So it just shows you how much the source strength of outdoor air impacts the quality of air that you see inside. So once I started using an air cleaner, I never turned it off. Even if I'm away, I don't turn it off. I just figure it's going to maintain and do a better job. In this case, I was away for a week, and I thought, oh, this is a good time to experiment. So I cycled it 6 hours on, 6 hours off. And that's the orange line you see at the bottom is the 6 hours on, 6 hours off. So you do see that it doesn't really, in my house, it didn't really hold the low particle counts. And this is, the low was anywhere between 40 and 100 when it was on. It crept back up in the 6 hours it was off, back to the same level that was in the untreated zone. So the idea of I'll just run it for an hour and then, I'll skate for the rest of the day doesn't quite cut it. You need to keep it on pretty often, or at least monitor to find out what the effect is. We did a survey about 2 years ago of participants that were using air cleaners or fan filters. Very good results in terms of people that continued to have their air cleaners or fan filters in use after the ROCIS monitoring, as you can see here. And then when we asked why, it was rewarding in that they basically say they saw the effectiveness or directly saw an impact on health of somebody in their family. So it's clear that the key thing, and actually there have been a number of studies of portable air cleaners, and the results have fairly consistently said that yeah, they seem to work well, but then when they check back in 3 months, in a year, or whatever, whether after wildfires in the Northwest or houses where they were treating them with people with asthma, they typically found that after the evaluators left, the air cleaners weren't being used. So to me, the biggest thing about air cleaners is providing the structure, the information so that they're kept on. And this is where I'm really concerned about features, the new features that are being offered, because I don't think that they contribute to keeping them on. Current air quality sensors that are being used, I don't think are sensitive enough based on my own experience having the Dilos next to an air cleaner and seeing when it responds to a spike. It tends to spike late, or it tends to kick on high late into a spike. And then in the couple cases I looked, we're really tracking closely. As soon as it got down to like 3,000 on the Dilos total, it kicked off. It sensed that the air was good. So the air quality sensor appears to only be looking at what you'd see in Dilos large, the 2 to 4 micron size. And this has been stated by someone who I know that does a whole lot of air quality sensor research. And his comment was, give it a few years, it'll be great. But right now, don't rely on the sensor. So if you have it set on auto, it boosts only when it senses a spike. And I just think we're missing the boat. If you remember from last time, the behavior, the kitchen stove emissions, the Dilos isn't even seeing stuff in the low range, below 1/10 of a micron. So running things continuously is going to help keep the air clean even when it's below the range that the Dilos would sense it. So if you've got one with an auto boost, I would just recommend not using it, leaving it on at a medium setting. I've always been frustrated by the timer feature because the timer feature is set to turn it off after either 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. I've actually used timers with some of the air cleaners, and we've suggested that people use the timer in the opposite way so that you can set the timer to turn it off for an hour, like in Jessie's case. Her husband didn't like the Austin being on during a TV show and that he couldn't quite hear, so the air cleaner would get turned off. Well, I'd say have the timer automatically turn it back on rather than turn it off, because that's what you want in order to have the ongoing use, or at least have the option of that kind of timer. And then the additive air purifiers, just avoid them at this time. Jeff Siegel's sort of the go-to person, or one of the key people in North America, probably in the world, on air cleaners. Cut his teeth on air cleaner research when he was a grad student in Austin. But anyway, this is his quote. And it's not just that they're not effective, it's also that they can emit things that are respiratory hazards. As far as I'm concerned, if Jeff says this, I'd consider this as good as it gets. So here are some links. Some of these have interviews with Jeff, but this last one, Mother Jones did a really excellent investigative reporting on air purifiers and COVID, and it's not critical at all of air cleaners. What it's critical of is ionization and other claims, and that's where the additive effect was quoted. And I know when I shared this with Dawn, I think, Dawn, your comment was pretty impressive, right, Dawn? You remember that one?
It's a great article.
So well worth looking at. So on to Jesse.
Okay, so in the summer of 2020, we did the Claritin Air Filtered project, and this was funded by Heinz. We worked with some of our partners, Clean Water Fund, Valley Can, they're listed there. And what we did was we went in 2 homes. We did a whole survey project of finding people with health issues is what we focused on. And we wanted to treat the regularly occupied spaces. So that would be the bedroom and like where you hang out during the day. So we did pre and post monitoring just like we do with you. So we did 1 week of no filtration at all. And then we gave them the air filters and they ran them for at least another 2 weeks. And we saw the effects just like we do with you guys as you add different modifications into your own homes. All right. So again, like we do with you, we had weekly feedback from Dawn, same type of thing, except we hand delivered it and we talked to them because we actually went out and downloaded all their dialos for them so that they wouldn't have to worry about that. We do have all of our results up on our website. I'll put that link in the chat after I'm done talking. And we're going to go through them here as well. So we served 47 households. We distributed 153 air cleaners, so that averaged 3.25 per home. But some homes only received 1 because they were a very small home and they only hung out in their bedroom anyway. Or some of them received 6 or 7 because it was a larger home. And the cost per home was about $870 for the air filters.
Just a note, that was with deep discount on purchases through bulk purchases and also being able to get them through my discounts. Okay, well, what we saw was that we were amazed at how high some of the dilose particle counts were. They were higher than we thought were even possible. The worst medians we had seen in our monitoring cohorts were like 3,000 or 4,000, typically in attached or multifamily buildings. But we saw some these 3 worst sites were, houses that I think for the most part had smokers. But anyway, we wanted to look specifically at the highest particle count households as well as the lowest. And we saw significant reductions in those that are highest. Even though the post was not a particularly good endpoint, it was still a huge reduction. It's clear that these filters would not last the predicted amount of time in these really, really high-use houses, which you see here. But then we're also curious, and it was interesting that these were out of the 47, the 6 lowest initial pre, and these numbers are probably comparable to some of you and better than many of you. So these are the medians, the dilose total, dilose small. And with those, we also saw a significant reduction, nearly all houses. So it was interesting to see that the reduction worked across the span of housing stock. This was summertime, so some of these houses had intermittent periods with the windows open.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at some DIY fan filters, which is what Monica was referencing earlier. So these are photos. Basically, it's a 20 by 20 inch box fan and a 4 inch by 20 by 20 MERV 13 furnace filter, and you just strap them together with tape or elastic straps. But it comes out to a cost of roughly $55 $50 to $70 depending on where you're buying your stuff, but it's really effective for that price. So this is an intervention that happened with one of the fan filters being added to somebody's indoor space. So the upper three levels of this graph are the proportion time graph, which you've seen before, and then the lower one is the data explorer. And basically what you're seeing is just a bunch of red and orange disappearing once that fan went in with the indoor and the roamer spot. So the roamer got a lot better comparatively, but both of them were really effective in the right direction. Here is a open window at night in the summertime for sleeping comfort. That's what they were doing, but they were concerned because of Pittsburgh's air being so poor that it was affecting them, and they would have been right in that assumption. So what they did is they took one of these fan filters and they put it drawing inward for the air in the window. So it's basically giving you fresh air, but it's filtering it. And as you can see in all these highlighted blue sections, the fan goes on and the particles completely bottom out to zero almost. I mean, relatively, maybe in the tens, but that's effectively zero in terms of Dilos small. And then in the morning they wake up and it goes off and they go out to work or whatnot and the particles spike again. If they're not spiking, they're at least tracking right in line with the outdoor with that purple, slightly below it, but not much of a discernible difference in the grand scheme of things, except when that fan filter is running. This is one of those Corsi Rosenthal boxes. So you take 4 filters and you make a kind of a walled box out of it. And you can put a base to it, like a piece of cardboard or something along those lines. And then you put the fan on top. You tape the seams as well, so that air infiltration isn't really getting past the filters. So the thought is that it could be less restrictive and it could be lasting longer as well. And people have used non-4-inch filters, which is a little bit cheaper than if you were doing 4-inch filters. So I don't know, Monica, do you want to chime in about this?
Sure. So I used 4 1-inch MERV 13 3M filters. And yeah, it was pretty easy to build. I put a base on it. I also put a cutout as a result of kind of following Richard Corsi and a few others' Twitter comments about this. I cut a piece of cardboard so that the center of it is a big circle on the top. And because of some concerns about the turbulence at the corners of the fan.
So do you run these with the air flowing into the box or out of the box?
It goes in, but supposedly I know Corsi and Rosenthal have chimed in on this on Twitter, and they think the air should go up, in other words, out of the box, because then it'll point up to the ceiling and circulate in the room.
And less discomfort that way, because with a fan filter, certainly some people have noticed the discomfort with the fan directly blowing horizontally. The other thing that's interesting about this, though, is that if you were to use 4-inch deep filters, this would not be a cost-effective solution based on, the most recent time I bought the 4-inch Honeywell MERV 13 filters, they were $40 a piece. Mm-hmm. So you could buy, and the WinX, Coay, and a number of the other fairly inexpensive Asian-made air cleaners are available for $150. So it would certainly seem like it would make sense to get something for less than $200 as a commercially available air cleaner. But if you're using the 1 or 2-inch filters, they're considerably less expensive. But the 1-inch filters, mostly the MERV 13s, are lots of times they're not rated as MERV. They're rated on a different scale. They've got an electrostatic charge. And that electrostatic charge makes the filter, the 1-inch filter, incredibly effective for the first week or two before the filter gets sort of clogged or the charge gets blocked. At that point, the filter is partially blocked and it filters more effectively because of its resistance. But the result of that is that we might see very good results with that type of filter for the first couple of weeks, but after that, the result might slowly decay. So that's a fairly important thing to keep an eye on. Not too many people are going to want to rebuild this every 3 weeks. And definitely we found that if you're using a 1-inch filter in your air handler, our recommendation is to replace the 1-inch filter every 2 or 3 weeks because of clogging and resistance. But there's a lot of people who tested airflow and basically said, you should not use a filter in the horizontal taped to the fan like we did originally because it restricts flow too much. And yet we've seen with a 4-inch, and like what you saw, Linda, it works, and it works for a long time. I mean, Emily has one that's pretty grungy that was in her basement, and it felt like it was moving the same amount of air after a year. Didn't look good, but it was moving air. So anyway, comments, questions?
I have a question. So in your experience, is it worthwhile to, alter your forced air system and have an air cleaner? Is it one or the other? Is it both?
There are many cases where it's not possible to modify an air handler for 24/7 operation. In that case, the only thing you can do are portable air cleaners or fan filters. And it's good that we've got that option. A number of our projects that have air handler interventions also use portable air cleaners just to drive that house into the, we've got one house that was typically 10 to 20 on the small Dylos total range. So we see, I don't have any idea if there's a benefit to a Dylos number of 10 or 20 versus Dylos 70 or 80. Sort of go by the lower the better, but who knows in terms of the energy use it takes to get there. So it's really an individual decision. But the key thing is that a filter in an air handler primarily reducing particles, whereas if you have an air cleaner that's not just doing particles, but also has a bunch of carbon in it, like the reason I like the Austins is they got like 15 pounds of carbon, that you're reducing other things too. So I think there's a really good complementary relationship going on.
So you could consider like an HVAC system having a MERV filter in there as maybe taking out larger particulate so that you're not then relying on your pre-filter in the Austin system as much, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and also when I've sold Austins to people, I've often said, well, why don't you do a fan filter or two in other spaces and use the Austin as a primary area in order to increase the benefit. But when I talked to my contact at Austin, they said actually the Austin's particle reduction isn't the limit on the filter. The limit on the filter is more the issues of the other stuff that it's removing. The bottom line is if you've got an air cleaner and it's mixing air throughout the house, you're going to see a benefit of reduced particles throughout the house.
And what is the average cost to take your HVAC system and just transform it like you showed in the video?
Perfect transition. The key thing is some don't need both the motor and the duct modification, so it does vary. And I don't know what an HVAC contractor with a profit motive would charge. So that's one limitation of our costs.